Ah, America, the most amazing country on the planet. Or at least, Americans seem to think so. Well, some of them. Actually, most of them seem pretty pissed off about things nowadays. Anyway, for such an amazing country, it always deserves to celebrate hard on its birthday, July 4th. Every American knows that July 4th is not only a day off from work, usually accompanied with barbecues and fireworks, but an incredibly important milestone when we declared our independence from the British monarchy in 1776. But what if July 4th isn't truly America's birthday and was actually a point of contention with one of the founding fathers during the time? And even then, others argue it didn't even take place in 1776. So when the hell was America born exactly? That's what we're going to find out with this week's historical history documentary. Let's begin with why July 4th was likely chosen. On July 4th, 1776, the Continental Congress approved the final text of the Declaration of Independence. It had been voted on July 2nd, but July 4 was the date the finalized document was adopted and printed. Why the delay? Well, on July 2nd, 1776, the Continental Congress voted to approve Richard Henry Lee's resolution declaring the colonies independent from Britain. But the Declaration of Independence, drafted by Thomas Jefferson and revised by Congress, was still under debate. Between July 2nd and July 4th, the Continental Congress made approximately 80 to 90 edits to Jefferson's draft, altering nearly a quarter of the text. These changes reflected both political pragmatism and collective authorship. Most significant omission, a long passage condemning King George III for supporting the slave trade. Jefferson accused the king of violating human rights by allowing the slave trade to flourish and by inciting enslaved people to rebel. Southern delegates, especially South Carolina and Georgia, objected, and the passage was cut to maintain unity. This is now often cited as an early, tragic compromise on slavery in the name of national cohesion. Beyond that, changes were more simple, such as toning down harsh language, tightening structure, and other stylistic polishings. But yeah, good going on that slavery choice, fellas. That's sarcasm if you can't sense it in my amazingly awesome voice. On July 4th, they approved the final edited text and ordered it to be printed and distributed. This date stuck because it's the date on the printed declaration, known as the Dunlap Broadside, distributed throughout the colonies. It became the symbolic birth certificate of the nation, clear, dramatic, and widely circulated. The date being marked on the declaration became etched in Americans' minds for generations to come. However, not everyone agreed. John Adams, in a letter written to his wife Abigail the day after the July 2nd vote, wrote, "The second day of July 1776 will be the most memorable epoch in the history of America. I'm apt to believe that it will be celebrated by succeeding generations as the great anniversary festival." He even imagined fireworks, parades, and public celebrations. It ought to be commemorated as the day of deliverance by solemn acts of devotion to God Almighty. It ought to be solemnized with pomp and parade, with shows, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, and illuminations. This makes it clear Adams fully expected July 2nd to become the national day of celebration. The Declaration's emotional power, its wide circulation, and its symbolic value as a public justification for independence made it the centerpiece of national memory. Over time, July 2nd faded into obscurity despite Adams' strong conviction. No historical evidence suggests Adams ever changed his mind. In fact, later in life, Adams continued to refer to July 2nd as the true anniversary. Ironically, Adams and Thomas Jefferson both died on July 4, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration. This eerie coincidence helped further cement July 4th in the national psyche, even as Adams had long argued for another date. But what if July 2nd or 4th isn't really true either? What if it isn't even July, or 1776? A common misconception is that all the colonies signed the Declaration, and everyone was united right then and there. Last week we discovered this wasn't the case, with the Articles of Confederation being America's first and failed attempt at uniting the colonies. Click the link in the description if you want to check that out. But regarding the Declaration, on July 4th, 12 of the 13 colonies formally voted to approve the final text of the Declaration. New York did not. Their delegates abstained because they hadn't yet received instructions from their provincial Congress. Oh, New York, just what the hell are we going to do with you? Although they're pretty cool nowadays, I suppose. It wasn't until July 9th, 5 days later, that the New York Provincial Congress finally authorized their delegates to support the Declaration. From that point forward, all 13 colonies were officially on board. Sit on it and spin, King George. Team America is here. Again, we said that they voted to approve the Declaration on July 4th, but no actual signing took place. In fact, some colonies weren't even in the room on July 4th. There was an official gathering of the Continental Congress on August 2nd, 1776, for the formal signing of the Declaration of Independence. But it wasn't quite the dramatic, all-at-once event we often imagine. In fact, some historians say the whole procedure was more akin to signing a yearbook. All the hard work was done, it was ratified. The signing was more symbolic. The Declaration of Independence, the engrossed, handwritten parchment copy, was presented for signing in Philadelphia, likely in the Pennsylvania State House, now Independence Hall. Most of the 56 eventual signers added their names that day. But not all signed then, as some delegates were absent due to illness, travel, or military service, newly appointed and hadn't been in Congress on July 4th or still awaiting state approval. Unlike what many Americans were taught in grade school, there's no contemporary record of a formal ceremony or speeches. It was likely a relatively quiet procedural act, with delegates coming up to sign in turn. The myth of a dramatic group signing, like in 1776, the musical, or various paintings, developed later, especially with John Trumbull's famous painting, which is not historically accurate. Many of the people shown weren't present at the same time. The last known signature on the Declaration of Independence was likely added as late as November 1776, several months after the initial signing on August 2nd. Thomas McKean of Delaware is often cited as the last signer. While November 1776 is the date usually cited, he may have signed sometime between late 1776 and early 1777, though documentation is unclear. McKean wasn't present on August 2nd due to military duties, and Delaware's delegate situation was in flux. Once all the signatures were applied, the Declaration of Independence took on a new life, not as a legislative act, which had already occurred, but as a foundational national symbol. Due to war and risk of capture, the parchment copy was moved frequently during the Revolution, such as Baltimore, Lancaster, York, Princeton, and Trenton. It's considered a sacred relic by the founding generation and eventually by the nation. In 1789, once the government was formed, the engrossed parchment copy, the one most people think of, was entrusted to the Department of State. Up until 1922, the Declaration was kept in various State Department buildings, sometimes displayed, sometimes stored in less than ideal conditions, which contributed to its fading. It was not widely displayed for many years and began to suffer from wear, fading, and environmental damage. In 1952, it was moved to the National Archives building in Washington, D.C., where it remains today in the rotunda for the Charters of Freedom, protected in a sealed bulletproof case with controlled lighting and humidity. Even before the signing, printed versions, the Dunlap broadsides, had already been distributed starting July 5, 1776. After signatures were added, new printed versions included names or references to the signers, further legitimizing the document. This also meant it was seen by many Americans during the time. Copies were sent to foreign powers to announce the United States' independence. France and Spain received versions as part of early diplomacy. This was the start of America's campaign for international recognition, and it helped lay the groundwork for French support in the Revolutionary War. The Declaration's text, especially Jefferson's prose, became central to American identity and philosophy, such as the phrase, "All men are created equal." The signers were mythologized as brave patriots, even though some were cautious or politically ambivalent at the time. Over the 19th century, July 4th and the Declaration became key symbols of American exceptionalism and freedom, which has continued to this day. And there you go. That's the story of America's birthday. It's clear that we needed a day to mark our independence, but was July 4th the right choice? Was John Adams right that it should have been July 2nd? Or maybe it should have been August 2nd or late November? If the signing was merely symbolic, does it really matter when we celebrate? What do you think? Sound off in the comments below. Be sure to like, subscribe, and click the hell out of that bell to stay up to date on all historical history documentaries and shorts. See you next week.